They called it the Dark Continent, a name that echoed through the pages of history, whispered by men who claimed they had come to discover, to enlighten, to civilize. But beneath that name hides a truth far more dangerous than darkness itself. A truth the world has spent centuries refusing to face. What if the Dark Continent was never dark at all? For centuries, Africa stood at the edge of European imagination. To them, it was a land unmapped, untouched, a mystery wrapped in jungles and deserts. The 19th century, explorers drew the lines of the known world. And everywhere they didn't understand, they colored it black. They called it terra incognita, unknown land, a blank space waiting to be conquered. And soon, a word followed that would stain the continent for generations. Dark. But here's the twist. They weren't describing the land. They were describing their ignorance. So why did they need the darkness? Why did Europe, already burning with ambition, need to paint an entire continent as shadow? Because in shadow, you can hide your sins. In the 1800s, the world was racing to expand its empires. Britain, France, Portugal, Belgium, each wanted a piece of the globe. But Africa was still unknown. Or so they said. They drew their maps, wrote their books, and told their people that beyond the Sahara lay a world of savages, beasts, and endless danger. Joseph Conrad would later call it the heart of darkness. And with that phrase, fiction became history. But here's the part they don't teach in school. Africa was not dark. It was glowing. Long before any European stepped foot here, the Mali Empire thrived. Rich in gold, knowledge, and order. Its ruler, Mansa Musa, became the wealthiest man in recorded history. He built cities of learning, libraries filled with scrolls and science. In the east, the kingdom of Axum traded with Rome and India, using its own written language when much of Europe still relied on memory and myth. In the south, Great Zimbabwe rose from stone, a city so advanced that early European explorers refused to believe Africans built it. They thought aliens did, or some lost white tribe. Because the truth that black Africans could create such grandeur was too bright for their comfort. So tell me, who then was truly living in darkness? When the explorers returned, they brought more than tales. They brought a story of a continent that needed saving. They said Africa was savage, primitive, godless. A land of beasts and black bodies waiting for the white man's light. They called it the civilizing mission. But behind the mask of civilization was a simple truth: greed. They wanted gold. They wanted land. They wanted control. And to take it, they needed a reason. So they painted Africa dark. They made the people appear childlike, in need of guidance. They called them heathens, then subjects, and finally slaves. Millions were stolen from their homes. Millions died in chains, in the belly of ships that fed empires. And when the world began to ask questions, Europe replied, "We're not enslaving, we're enlightening." That's how powerful words can be. One word, dark, turned crimes into missions. Then came the Berlin Conference of 1884, a room full of men who had never seen the Nile or the Niger, sitting around a table, cutting Africa apart like a cake. No African voice was present, not one. And in that single meeting, 10,000 tribes were split. Borders were drawn. Nations were created or destroyed. The scramble for Africa had begun. The word dark now had new meaning. Not mystery, not exploration. Domination. Mines were dug, forests stripped, languages silenced. Children were forced into foreign schools, where they learned to despise their own names. They told Africans their gods were demons, their kingdoms forgotten, their history erased. And so, when the world looked upon Africa again, all they saw was poverty, never asking who created it. But here, where the story twists again, because the continent they tried to bury refused to die. The soil still spoke, the drums still echoed, the people still remembered. From Lagos to Nairobi, from Accra to Addis Ababa, voices began to rise. Scholars, revolutionaries, storytellers, rewriting the story they were never allowed to tell. And when the truth returned, the world had no choice but to face the question, what if the darkness was never in Africa, but in the eyes that looked upon her? Today, we walk the same lands they once feared to enter, and we find light everywhere. Light in the music of the griots who carried history through song. Light in the pyramids of Sudan and the manuscripts of Timbuktu. Light in the art, science, and spirit of a people who refuse to forget. Even after centuries of distortion, Africa remains what it always was. A cradle of life, a well of wisdom, a continent older than time itself. So the next time you hear someone call Africa dark, remember what that word was designed to do. It was never a description. It was a weapon to justify chains, wars, and stolen futures. But here's the beauty of truth. No matter how long it's buried, it finds a way to rise. Because the continent they once called dark is rising again. The question now is, can the world finally see her light? Africa was never the dark continent. The darkness belonged to the ignorance of those who refused to see. For centuries, they wrote our story in shadows. But now we hold the pen. And when Africa tells her story, the world will finally understand. The only thing dark was the lie itself. Because the past isn't dead. It's alive in every truth we uncover. This is DARKTV Chronicles, where Africa tells its own story. Because the story of Africa is not one of chains, but of crowns. If you believe the world deserves to hear Africa's truth, like, share, and subscribe.